All right, there we go. I think I'm going. So chapter 2, it's almost an oxymoron, right? Business law and ethics, and the two of those, and do they go together or don't they? That's what it was like for me growing up. Yeah. A couple of the learning objectives. We'll talk about consequentialism and formalism a little bit. The connections between law and ethics, and there are certainly connections there, lots of them. And we'll talk about where ethical values come from. The thing I often say about ethics too, and fortunately or unfortunately, as you go through your career, you're going to be faced with ethical dilemmas that weren't of your own making. I can't tell you, there's some big ones that I do remember, but in my banking career, but there were many, that occurred daily, weekly, monthly, a lot of little itty bitty ones that weren't really consequential, but there were some big ones too, and they didn't have anything to do with anything that I had started. It just, here, this is on your desk now. It's an ethical dilemma that you're going to have to, make a decision about. And those things they become kind of difficult. So having a good grounding, I think, is kind of important. Barbara Tuchman, I think she was just kind of a philosopher. I've looked her up in the past. We suffer from a loss of moral sense, right, of knowing the difference between right and wrong and being governed by it. People would argue that that's the case today for a lot of reasons. Oliver Wendell Holmes was a Supreme Court justice. He says the law is the witness and external deposit of our moral life. Okay, and you'll hear the phrase often, you can't legislate morality, but that's false. Most of our laws are based on morality and the morals that we hold as a society, and that's kind of what he's saying there. So today's day and age, companies do hire ethics officers, big companies. I imagine if you've got less than 100 employees, you probably don't have a separate ethics officer, and maybe even far more than that. Okay, but bigger companies are hiring those. Sarbanes-Oxley was a law that came along in the wake of the Enron scandal, which was long before your guys' time, at least, of reading news. Some of you may have been alive then, but you wouldn't have read about it because you probably weren't able to read. But the Enron scandal was kind of a big thing, and so we ended up with some additional regulations as a result of that. Something that's new, and for that reason, I'm sure it's on the test. It's probably not in your textbook, however, but I'm positive it will be on the test. That we're hearing more about is ESG. Okay, at least I hear about that because I watch a lot of business finance types of programming. And that's environmental, social, and governance. And so we're seeing shareholders, and we're going to talk a little bit about stakeholder versus shareholder theory and a few things like that. And so we're seeing a lot of stakeholders and shareholders pushing companies to consider these things, right? The environment, social justice, we'll call it that, and corporate governance and what goes on there. So isn't that the truth? Yeah. We put up some stats, and these are kind of old, but insider trading, enforcement actions. Insider trading is, if you work for a company or have a huge interest in a company, you're kind of limited in how you can trade that company's stock. And we bring that up in this sense because there's a lot of actions that have happened, big ones, for insider trading, and some big names, and some that weren't necessarily working at the company. You guys have heard of Martha Stewart. She was in the news. This has, again, been quite some time ago, but for some insider trading action because she got a tip from somebody that was inside a company, and she acted on that tip, saved money. It was the stock was going to go down, and she was told you might want to sell the stock before it goes down. So she saved a couple $100,000. Nothing for a gal that at the time was worth $50 million, but nevertheless, she served 6 months of house arrest. I think she might have spent 6 months in a jail too. I think it was 6 months in the jail and then 6 months of house arrest. So some recent ones. This is, you could click on this. I'm not gonna. We don't have time, but click on this and it would take you to the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and some of the litigation that they've had ongoing regarding some of the scandals that have taken place. And I put up a couple. The Bernie Madoff one's old. You guys probably don't remember it. Wells Fargo's fairly recent. I put that one on there because we've heard Wells Fargo's been, they've had troubles getting out of their way. The big one that was recent, they've had some others even since then. They're a little smaller, but they were pushing their employees to sell products. And in a bank, a product might be a checking account, a savings account, a CD, a credit card. Okay, those are called products, even though they're more of a service. But so they were pushing and they were pushing them so hard. And I know this. I remember, competing against Wells Fargo and whatnot. They were pushing them so hard that what a few of the employees started to do is they resorted to creating fake accounts. So it would make their productivity look better. Well, that happened, and then pretty soon some other employees figured out what was going on, and so they started doing it, and it became widespread throughout the corporation, okay? And they finally got caught, when some customers found out that there was another, checking account or savings account that was in their name that they had no idea about, right? Okay, and so the house of cards fell, and Wells Fargo itself got into lots of trouble, and they paid out lots of dollars, again, multi-billions of dollars in settlement, okay? And of course their stock suffered big time. And prior to that, Wells was considered one of the better managed, better operating banks, and so it was an interesting time listening to it. That was during the Enron scandal. Yeah, Enron donated a lot of money to a lot of politicians back in the day on both sides of the aisle. So that's what this cartoon's about, is that the janitor had to preside over the hearings about it because he was the only one that didn't have a conflict of interest. So, some contemporary issues again. We're a diverse society. We're seeing that more and more now. We're not just a diverse, but we're a very divided society. We've seen declines in the ability of public education, but more so because of the lapse in family structure. You could read some good economists that talk a lot about the decline in the family structure and how that's affected the education side of things and other things. Interdependence, we're not as interdependent as we once were. Neighbor helped neighbor and those types of things. We're a little less. And the news media obviously has changed dramatically. And what I would say about that is that the news media, I'll just make a basic statement. We live, and you can look up the statistics and find this out for yourself, but we live in absolutely the safest time ever in the history of mankind. Okay, there's absolutely no question about that. The statistics would show that up and down. How many millions of people died during World War II? How many millions died in the Ukraine? What do they call that when the Soviets starved them out? How many millions of people died with Mao Zedong and in China and on and on and on? Okay, and those things aren't happening. We absolutely live in the safe. But if you read the internet, okay, and the media, and even with the pandemic, we're still so far better off than in past years. So far, it's unbelievable. But if you read the media, what would you think? Yeah, we're all going to die, and it's horrible, and on and on and on. So, the news media is interesting. So, if we don't have good ethicals, though, the government may step in. We're going to see more government stepping in. Self-regulation within industries happens, fairly often actually, and we'll talk about some of those maybe as we go along. But Paul Harvey, for you guys, I feel sorry for you guys that are young. You guys never got to listen to Paul Harvey. Growing up, he was a radio commentator, and he came on at noon. And we'd be in the middle of harvest sometimes when I was out helping my cousin harvest, and at noontime, everything shut down. And you listened for 15 minutes to Paul Harvey, period. It didn't matter if you were cutting 100 bushel to the acre crop. You shut down when Paul Harvey came on. So the ethics survey found a decline in observed misconduct in the workplace. I would say absolutely. Maybe that's not what we hear in the media, but workplaces have become, I can tell you, I was in the workplace years and years ago, and it was a looser environment than it is today for sure. That's being nice. I could tell you stories, not so much about me, but stories that I knew, that happened and things like that I won't tell you because I'd probably get in trouble. So ethics and morality, right? Morality is those values that guide one's behavior. We get those from all kinds of things. Businesses have an obligation, right, to instill moral values in their employees. So we're all on the same page. We're all working for the same goals and for the right reasons. Ethics is a little more formalized. The good is having moral goals and objectives that one or a company chooses to pursue. Sorry, I know some people were still kind of writing there, so. One thing I'd add to this, and I know it's changed, Marianne, I know you went and looked at it, the link that I gave you to the Texas Instruments. And years ago, they were lauded a lot. They had, and this happens in a lot of organizations, where through the years they kept building and adding to their code of ethics. And they'd gotten to the point where their code of ethics filled a bookshelf, or at least one shelf on a bookshelf, right? It's this long from here to here. And so a new employee would show up and somebody would say, oh, here's our code of ethics, come and read it and understand it and know everything about it, right? Guess what? That didn't work so well, and they figured that out. And what they did is they threw it all out, and they developed what was it, principles? I think it was 6 at the time. 6 guiding principles, I think they called them. And that was it. Okay, that was their code of ethics, was those 6 guiding principles. And a lot of people read those and said, that makes a lot more sense. I can tell you too that anytime you get, a code of ethics or any kind of a code or a worker's manual or whatever, personnel manual, whatever it might be, the minute you fire somebody, they're going to read through that. Good lawyer's going to read through that and find something that you violated, and you're going to be in trouble. Whereas if you have these guiding principles that are a little broader, they're a little bit more vague. It's also a little bit harder to, sue and say you violated this particular point. So ethical values may become law through legislation and court decisions, both. We know that, right? Many ethical values aren't enforced by the state, however. They're just things that we do and know, and right? The motivation to follow laws and ethics differ. Lanny and I have had this argument before. Can you break the law and be ethical in doing that? You guys are nodding. Lanny used to, I nod too. I say absolutely. And Lanny would shake his head and say, no, God dang, the law is a law, and you're unethical if you break the law. One of the biggest ethical dilemmas I had in my banking career, I definitely broke the law, but it was, just to make a long story short, it was some old fellas that were getting scammed, and I knew it, but you got privacy, right? Okay, so, yeah. Do you call the cops? You know that they're getting scammed, and to the tune, and it ended up being to the tune of about $750,000. Yeah. I called the cops, I called the FBI, I got told, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it unless they file a complaint. Ultimately, the only reason they caught the couple that was doing the scamming was when one of the old guys died, his estate had to sue the other guy just to bring it, and they knew they weren't going to get any money, and they didn't do it for that reason. They did it just to bring it to the attention then of the legal authorities, who then went after them. They caught the couple, and they spent some time in prison. Thank God. But anyhow, so those are some of the ethical things. Again, not something that I created by any means, but something you had to deal with a little bit. So Ethical systems, involve the broader based, right? Again, what do you do? Does it break the law? Maybe, yeah, it could. We talk about two systems of ethics, both formalism and consequentialism. Formalism is, absolute. Okay, I liken it sometimes to the Ten Commandments: "Thou shalt not," right? You will not do this. You will not do that. And a lot of formalism might be found in some religions. Very firm adherence to those types of things. Consequentialism says we're more interested in the end result. Okay, we're a little bit more interested in the end result. And so while we might somewhere along the line step away from the law or step away from other things that we might consider moral or ethical, as long as the end result is good, we can justify it. Okay? And these aren't mutually exclusive. A lot of things would end up being somewhere in between those, very likely, right? So it's just kind of gives you an idea when you're looking at things, I guess, whether you think the end result's worth stepping out of line, or do we go with the formalism and say, no, I can't do that because it violates the law. I got to stay closer to the mic. Sorry. Sorry for you guys that are listening, maybe on here. So philosophers call the end result of the ethical examination the good, the bad, the ugly, or the rule of law. Go with A in that case, right? Is there a relationship, however, between law and ethics? Sure. Yeah, there's a relationship there, but they're not absolute. There's a lot of crossover, but then there's a lot on both sides too that kind of sticks out. So. Sources, right? Where does it come from? Our sources of values or our sources of ethics? Some of it comes right from legal regulations, things that we grow up with maybe. Right? You speed, you're putting other people in danger. Okay, so you learn those types of things as you're growing up, as you get your driver's license, et cetera, et cetera. Professional codes of ethics, think about professions like accountants or maybe the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take. Lawyers, believe it or not, have a code of ethics too that exists within the profession. Be interesting to read theirs, but I never have. And then you have organizational codes of ethics, so that's a business or an organization, could be a not-for-profit, could be anything, right? And they may have their own code of ethics. Generally speaking, just so you know, we would say that professional codes typically trump organizational codes. So if you're a member of the AIPAC, American Institute of Public Accountants, or something like that, okay, and your organization is doing something here, but your professional code of ethics says this, you should default, they say, you should default to what your professional code of ethics, okay? The ultimate, and I think this is on the test, the ultimate source of ethical values is individual values, though, right? It's what we determine for ourselves. Absolutely. Try to keep, I'll be passing him. Again, some things that, some of the ethical values that, we draw from others. Respect liberty and the rights of others. Okay. It's certainly one of the arguments for why we wear these right now, right? Okay. You guys, for example, are based on your age and probably your health, are at almost zero risk of any complications or anything from the virus, but you're told, right, wear the mask because you're protecting others. So, Act in good faith, and again, that gets into tort. When we get talking about tort law, we'll talk about having to act in good faith, that we have a duty of care, and we have to act in good faith and trying to get down to the next one, exercise that due care. Question?
Just FYI, based on those, if somebody is passed out and their heart stops and you drink, you have two options. You can do CPR or you do not have to do CPR.
Right.
But once you start CPR, you cannot quit.
Right.
That's in there.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you take on some risk in administering that type of aid? Yeah.
And if you start and stop, they can, the family, and the person dies, the family can sue you for stopping.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe. Anybody can sue anybody anytime for anything, so they can sue you. You know, there is a point of exhaustion. I mean, we're taught that when we learn CPR, that if it's just you,
you have to keep on until the ambulance comes.
yeah, or until you're exhausted, right? Now, in this case, we'd have other people in the room, and so you'd be given instructions on, when I get too tired, Aaron's going to take over, right? Here, Aaron, let me show you how to do this, okay? So you can enlist help like that, okay? Yeah, Montana also, just so you know, Montana does have a Good Samaritan law. It's not perfect, again, but it should protect people that, you know, offer assistance in cases like that from some of the lawsuits. But you still have that duty of good care, right? Okay. So, and I don't know if Marianne, you know, I'm trained in CPR. I got my card. I do ski patrol, and so I have to have CPR card. So yeah, I have to follow, you know, the rules. We're refreshed every year on it, and on and on and on. And so, you know, there's certain rules that you're to abide by when you do it too, and you have to follow that, because that's exercising due care. If I were to fall outside of what I've been trained, I would be, you know, subject to a potential lawsuit in that case. So, right. We honor confidentiality, and again, you know, I told you about my ethical dilemma there, where, yeah, you know, confidentiality versus protecting people that you know, 80-year-old guys that are getting scammed. Avoid conflicts of interest. Yeah, we try to do that. We have to sign every year a conflict of interest form here at the college that says, you know, we don't have any conflicts of interest with people, you know. In our position as professors, it would be unusual that we would have those types of conflicts of interest. But if you're in administrative types of positions, you surely could, right? I suppose we could as professors, but we typically don't exercise that much control over other things, right? Professional codes, right? Oftentimes based on history and tradition. It is a self-regulatory thing where, right, there isn't government intervention necessarily. This is those professions saying we're going to follow certain rules and certain conduct when we do our business. You know, and they do that to protect their profession, right? They do that so that we hold them in high regard, hopefully. Okay? And some examples are the American Bar Association, which is lawyers, and American Institute of I was close. American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Yes, I know we're getting close to time, but organizational. Sometimes there's industry codes too. You know, there are some different industries, and they make up codes of ethics. I don't recall that we had in banking that we had any industrial codes that we followed. There was a Montana Bankers Association, there was American Bankers Association, and those types of things, but I don't recall necessarily that they had codes of ethics that they, you know, created that we followed. Not in my memory anyhow.
Well, you didn't take my $10,000 out of my savings account and go buy a personal thing for yourself, did you?
Right, but that was one that was legal. But
no, I'm not saying you took out a loan. You just took my money and went and bought something personal for yourself.
right,
That would fall under that.
right.
For, you know, hey, Marianne's got 10 grand and I need 9 of it. I'm just going to take it for my own. I need a new whatever, and then I'm not
Yeah, I just don't know that it was ever written out in an industry. You know, certainly that would have been, one, illegal, but two, in our bank, yeah, it would have violated, you know, it would have violated any ethical code that you might have, certainly. Even if you had those broad ones, you know, broad ones would say you're not gonna, you know, commit crimes or do those types of things, right? So, you can't what?
You can't tell people that I have $10,000.
No. No, yep, yep. So self-regulation within industries requires, though, you gotta have some enthusiasm, and it's gotta come from the top, right? It's gotta come from the top, and too often we see leaders that fall, you know, we've seen that with all the mask mandates and everything, right? And how many examples of politicians have we seen, you know, that shortly after they did a mask mandate, then, you know, they were caught, I'll pick on Governor Newsom in California, right? Puts in effect, you know, big restrictions, including mask mandates, and then he goes to a high-class restaurant with 11 of his friends and relatives and has dinner and nobody's wearing a mask, right? Okay, so pick on him a little bit, but you could find probably a dozen examples from across the more than a dozen, I'm sure, right? And provide for some sanctions within the industry or within the organization too, that if those things are violated. So, all right, time's up. Friday we'll finish chapter 2. Monday again. Monday we will plan on having a test over chapters 1 and 2. Okay. Multiple choice, generally speaking. Every now and then I'll throw in a weird question here or there. So.
You got office hours?
Tomorrow?
Between 10 and 11.
Should be, yeah.